Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to do my final review of the Zeiss Milvus. This is the APO Sonnar 135mm f2 lens, and it is a fresh update with the Milvus build of an older optical formula, and I say older, although it's really not all that old. I reviewed the original, now classic APO Sonnar lens a little less than 4 years ago, and so it's not that there was anything wrong optically with the lens. In fact, it was exceptional already, one of the best lenses optically in the world. But what Zeiss has been doing over the past few years is they've been standardizing their line to the new Milvus build. And so in some cases that's included the necessity of creating a whole new lens at that focal length to kind of bring it up to Zeiss's modern standards. But in cases like the APO Sonnar, it's really just a matter of just giving it the fresh build, the fresh design, and a few optimizations and tweaks to bring it into the standard of the Milvus line. And if you haven't already watched it, I did an episode that you can take a look at here, in which I kind of broke down the overall build and the handling differences. And so just a couple of things to highlight. One kind of major physical difference is that whereas the lens before, when you were to zoom it out, the current lens, it will extend out at the front of the barrel. However, in the original design, much like the Milvus 100, it would actually rotate at two different sections, between the base of the lens and then to that center focus ring, and then also beyond that. And so unlike that design, Zeiss has optimized the barrel to now it stays at a fixed focal length just right up into that little focus extension in the inner barrel. And unlike the previous design, it's now just a single extension, and so it's a little bit more of a sturdy design. Not that the other was anything wrong with it, but it's just bringing it to that kind of Otis looking, Milvus now looking overall look with the anodized metal finish, beautifully curved and tapered out, and then the rubberized focus ring. This lens focuses absolutely magnificently, and just a perfect kind of focus throw. And it was interesting to note that I was in a board meeting last week with a friend who is not really a photographer, but he's been kind of, looking at getting into it a bit, and so he's asking questions. And I happen to have this lens mounted on the new 5D Mark IV, and so he picked it up. And of course, to a novice, that's a big, heavy chunk of equipment. But when he held it up and he began to focus and just felt how smoothly it focused and watched that magic of things coming into focus as he moved the lens, he says, "You've almost persuaded me." I wasn't even trying to, but there's just something that is very addictive about that smooth focus action. Of course, the big change in the Milvus line is the addition of a very thorough weather sealing. And so now the lens is highly moisture resistant and has the rear gasket, internal seals, and is just ready to shoot in all kinds of conditions. And that gives it a leg up over, say, the Canon 135mm f2L, which is not weather sealed. In fact, it's got a lot of legs up of it, at least when it comes to the image quality and the build. And if you'll look at this segment here, I do a very direct head-to-head image quality comparison. And as you're going to see in that video, this lens basically demolishes the 135L in every way save autofocus. But there are some downsides to the Milvus build. If you are a fan of small, compact lenses, this lens is neither of those things. And in fact, the weight increased over 150 grams to the new build. It also got a little bit longer overall, but I do suspect that it actually extends less far out. And so it's not internally focusing, but it's shifted a little bit towards that. But the overall dimensions and girth have grown to the Milvus design, which has been the case for all the Milvus lenses that I've seen to this point. And so the lens is a hefty 1,123 grams, which is almost 2.5 pounds. And so it's a significant chunk of lens, but at the same time, it's not so onerously heavy or front heavy that it feels imbalanced on a full frame body. It's a little over 4.5 inches long, or 115 millimeters. And so in its physical dimensions, it's actually smaller, however, than the newly announced Sigma 85mm f1.4 art lens, which is going to be a kind of a beast of a lens in terms of its size. So anyway, it is a significant lens. It's a large lens, and it has a 77 millimeter front filter thread. But today let's focus a little bit more on the image quality itself. The image quality from this lens is essentially perfect. It is very consistently sharp from edge to edge and is far above any other 135 millimeter option in terms of its raw resolution. Really the closest 135 millimeter option I'm aware of is the Samyang Rokinon 135 millimeter f2. But it's incredibly sharp, and beyond that it has that incredible Zeiss micro contrast. And if you look at the actual episode where I compare with the Canon 135L, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about when I say micro contrast. I kind of break that down a little bit further there, but just to sum it up, it has that amazing three-dimensional quality to where even when I was looking at the fine textures like on the focus rings of the vintage lenses that I was using as a test subject for the resolution comparison, you'll find that on those that you can see like the ridges of that focus ring standing out with very clear delineation from the bright to the dark areas, and so it gives just that three-dimensional pop, whereas the same textures looked rather flat and muddy on the Canon 135L. And so it's got amazing contrast at any focal length. Doesn't matter what distance you're shooting at, it just resolves incredibly highly. And so on top of that, it shows basically zero chromatic aberration in any kind of situation that I can see. And so that's basically perfectly controlled. Distortion, you can tell even though the 135L doesn't have a lot of distortion, you can tell a notable difference towards the edges of the frame in the amount of distortion. So distortion is basically non-existent. And so in terms of all the corrections, it's basically perfectly done. The one thing that the lens will do that can either be a pro or a con, depending on your shooting desire or situation, is that when the sun is in the frame, it will veil somewhat. It will lose a little bit of contrast, and in my opinion, it creates quite an artistic look, and I'll throw up a few samples here for you to look at. But it's been noted, I actually just recently had a wedding photographer contact me that has the classic APO Sonnar 135 and then also shoots with one of the Otis lenses. And he noted that when he was shooting in backlit situations, that the Otis retained basically perfect contrast, while the APO Sonnar would provide some of that kind of veiling. It doesn't really ghost, it just veils, and so there's no nasty artifacts to clear up, but there is some loss of contrast. And so, as I said, in some situations you'll probably find it to be an artful addition, and it's not nearly as bad as what the Canon 135L is, which will almost blow out the image if the sun's right in the frame. And so it's better than that. The coatings are better, but at the same time, if you're looking at the upgrade hoping that that has been eliminated, I wouldn't say that it has. Optically, it's pretty similar to the 135 classic lens. But overall, image quality is exceptional. We'll take a couple of minutes and just look at a few images together. Won't take long with this, but just to kind of give you an idea of what I'm looking about when I describe the image quality. First couple is just to look at the overall center sharpness of this, and so obviously this is pretty close to minimum focus, very shallow depth of field, but as you can see, this was shot on a Canon 6D body. There's an amazing amount of resolution, like macro level resolution that is there on an image like that. And likewise here, this is a low shot of a dandelion, and of course beautiful bokeh in the background. But if we look in at our subject here, you can see that there's just incredible sharpness and detail that is rendered there. And so a very impressive result. And just the overall look, this hasn't been touched up in any way. That's right out of camera. It's a beautiful Zeiss color as well. Now to look at a couple of portrait type images. This is both at f2, so you can see out of head and shoulders, the background is completely blown out here. And then if we look in close, we see that there is an incredible amount of resolution and detail. There's not any extra sharpness that's been added to this. Just right out, you can see the not only is the sharpness incredible, but the skin tones, the rendering of that is very natural, very pleasing. Here, this is a little warm because of the background, which is a reflector. This was a quick headshot for a friend at a board meeting. And so this good-looking fella, this is also at f2, but you can see, looking at the detail of on his face, that it's just an incredibly sharp and a very flattering portrait lens for a number of reasons. Now here we're going to actually back off and we're going to compare these two head to head. Now these are both shot, and by the way, also the last shot was on the new Canon 5D Mark IV. But here in my comparison against the Canon 135L, some people said, well, of course, the 135L is a 20-year-old lens. So I thought I would compare the Milvus 135 against a new, very sharp lens, and that is the new Tamron 85 VC. And so here, both at f2, we're going to take a look. This is on a 5D Mark IV, and so as we compare, we can see that there is definitely, look in this area here, there's definitely just more sharpness and contrast and rendering of these details. Look at the difference in the bush here. Obviously a pretty notable difference in the grasses here. And, you know, and as we go throughout here, let's look at this section right here. You can see a big difference in the contrast and the overall sharpness and rendering there. And so, you know, overall, there certainly is a notable difference between the Tamron here, which is a great sharp lens, and the Milvus 135. And so, you know, and that sharpness, it extends right out to the edge of the frame here. And I don't think you're going to find much of a difference. You know, looking right out here at the edge, you can see that the detail is just as good there. And then finally, let's look at just one another image at infinity here. This is stopped down a little bit. In fact, it is f5.6. And so here I wanted to give you an idea of just what it could render. And so this is on the 5D Mark IV, and as you can see, an amazing amount of resolution and detail here in this foreground and in this kind of like peninsula or island area. There's just an amazing amount of detail rendered there, and just right out to the very edge of the frame. I mean, as far as you can see, this part is still a little bit defocused here, but I mean, that sharpness is right out there at the edge. And then if we look towards infinity, this is really where it starts to impress me. If you can see how finely rendered everything is, all of the detail on this far shoreline, and a great contrast between the shadow and the bright area. Just a really, really impressive performance when you consider that, you know, this distant shore is, from where I was shooting, is probably at least a third of a mile, probably over half a kilometer from where I was shooting, and still you can see it's just resolving really incredibly. So overall, a really impressive lens optically. So as you can see, in every kind of situation, the resolution is very impressive. It adds a greater maximum magnification than what the Canon has, and so has a very useful 0.25 magnification, or a quarter times life size. That will allow you to get a little bit closer for framing, not just for headshots and people shots, but also if you're wanting to use the lens in an artistic way. And as you can see from these photos, if you get close, it really creates an amazing amount of cream that just turns everything else into beautifully rendered out of focus, while at the same time your subject matter is extremely sharp. And so it's very useful to use in that sense, and I enjoy shooting it in that way. So bottom line is that Zeiss has added some nice features to this lens without really increasing the price. The list price in the US is $2,199, and that is identical to what the MSRP on the classic lens was. Now, the classic lens is probably going to be available at some discounted prices, and it's still a great lens if you're looking at that. But if you would like the Milvus look and also the weather sealing, which is a pretty huge thing, you know, this really is, while it's an expensive lens, when you compare it to the Otis series, which it is very comparable to in many ways, I think that you're getting, you know, reasonable value for money. And if you're not put off by having to manual focus, this is manual focus only. However, in the Canon mount, the aperture is controlled electronically in the body, just like any other lens. It has a focus confirm chip, which I don't rely on much on the 6D body that I shot a lot on for the review, because I have a matte precision screen, EGS focus screen in there to help with that. However, I did shoot with it a fair bit on the 5D Mark IV, and while you're missing that kind of visual confirmation of true depth of field, I did find that the focus confirm allowed me to get pretty consistent results using a body without the focus screen. And so that focus confirm does certainly help. I prefer the process of shooting with an actual precision matte screen in the body. But anyway, if you're shooting a body that doesn't allow for an easy swap out, you still can, with some practice, learn to nail your focus results and rely a little bit more on that focus confirmation. But it is manual focus only, it is heavy, and it is expensive. But if none of those things put you off, it is a magnificent lens that I believe is the best 135mm lens that money can buy right now. It's a lens that will last you for life and will give you a lot of pride of ownership. I'll throw a link down below to my full written review. Also, there's a link there to an image gallery that I have loaded up with images shot in a variety of situations. There's also a link there if you would like to shop and look at the lens and consider purchasing. You can follow me on social media, and if you haven't already, please click that subscribe button. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.